Shalom Avracha. We know that there's a mitzvah of Tevilat Kelim, of immersing vessels that we bought from a non-Jew in a mikvah before they can be used by a kosher kitchen. Just like when a non-Jew wants to convert and become part of the Jewish people, so too all the utensils, the pots and pans that want to become part of the Jewish kitchen need to have a dip in the mikvah and toivel before they become part of a kosher Jewish kitchen. What do you do if you're traveling or in a place where the mikvah is closed, where there's no way you can toivel your dishes? This happened very recently at Pesach. Many people bought new dishes, and the mikvahs, because of the coronavirus, were closed. What do we do in such a situation? Well, let's start from the easiest to the most difficult. The easiest solution is to buy vessels that don't require dipping in the mikvah. The only vessels that require dipping in the mikvah are ones made of metal or glass. But if you bought bamboo or wood or plastic, we don't have to dip them in the mikvah. Also, the custom today is that vessels that we're only going to use one time, disposable, even if they're made out of metal, if it's a disposable tray and we're going to use it one time, the custom is not to dip them in the mikvah. So that's one option. If you're in a place where there's no mikvah or you're unable to dip them in the sea or a river, buy vessels that don't need dipping, silicone or things like that. But what about if you really actually do need a metal vessel, a pot, a pan, something like that? Well, the next option is that you could give them to a non-Jew and then borrow them back. This is based on the halacha that only utensils that become a permanent part of a Jewish kitchen need to go into the mikvah. But if I borrow from a non-Jew their vessels, and the vessels belong to a non-Jew, at that point, I don't need to dip them in a mikveh in order to use them, because they're not mine. I'm just borrowing them. So, if you have a non-Jewish friend, you can transfer ownership of the vessels to the non-Jew. You can give them to him or her, and then say, could I borrow them back? Now, you're allowed to explain all this to them. I actually did this myself when it came to Pesach. Here in Jerusalem, we're under total lockdown, but we managed to buy some new chopping knives for Pesach, and I needed to dip them in the mikvah, but the mikvah was closed. I called up a non-Jewish acquaintance I have. I explained to them that if they have ownership of the knives and I just borrow them, I can use them without putting them in the mikvah. But for myself, if I own them, I have to find a mikvah, and I can't do that in the situation at the moment. I transferred ownership to him. I took a picture of them and I wrote out on WhatsApp, these knives now belong to Mr. whoever, and I sent them to him. At that point, he wrote back on WhatsApp, I give you permission to borrow my knives. I then now used his knives in my kitchen until the mikvah opened up. Then he said, I'm giving you the knives back. And I took them to the mikvah and toiveled them. So that's a second option. You could use such an option. There are certain websites that are now doing that. If you have vessels that are electric and hard to put in the mikvah ever, you might want to permanently give them to a non-Jew and permanently borrow them back in order to exempt them from putting in the mikvah. The third option, first option was to take material that doesn't need a mikvah. Second option, give it to a non-Jew and borrow it back. The third option is that an item that is ownerless, hefker, does not need to go in a mikveh before you use it. So, when you buy the object, you're buying a pot from a shop. Normally we pay, and then we take the new pot we've bought, and it's ours. I paid the shop, Target, and I acquired from Target the pot for myself. But I don't have to do that. I could pay Target that the pot should not belong to Target anymore, and then have in my mind that it's not mine. At the time of payment, I assume that I'm paying so it doesn't belong to Target, but if someone asks me, is it mine? I say, no, it's ownerless. Anyone can take it. At that point, I can take it home and use it without putting it in the mikvah. Of course, if my neighbor comes in and wants to take the pot and says, can I take your pot? You would have to say, it's not mine. Feel free. It's ownerless. And we can see that at a certain point, this is going to become a legal fiction that is not good. But from the letter of the law, an ownerless pot can be used without toivling. If you already bought the pot and you took it home, then to make it ownerless is much trickier. You have to find 3 Jews and put the pot in front of them and declare it ownerless, which is often very tricky. And then if you picked it up and used it, it wouldn't need toivling, but that's a bit trickier. So we've mentioned 3 different ways for times of need to use vessels without putting in the mikvah: substances, materials that don't need, like plastic, or to give it to a non-Jew and then borrow it back until we can get the vessel to the mikvah, or in a time of great need, when we buy the object, not to acquire it for ourselves, just to pay that it should be ownerless. And at that point, it now does not need to be put in the mikvah. Shalom Uvracha.